welcome back, everybody. Every expert has a book inside them waiting to be written. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and the Creative Content Officer at Authors on Mission, where we turn that possibility into reality. And today we're sitting with Andy Hunt, their award-winning author of The Pragmatic Programmer. It's actually a new revised version for its 20th anniversary edition, and he also has many other popular books. So we're going to talk about all of those as we continue this podcast. But what you need to know for now is whether you're a budding programmer or an experienced developer or just a fan of great stories, you're in for a treat because that's what Andy here is all about. So let's dive in and learn from one of the best in the field. Welcome, Andrew. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And Andy's fine.
Andy's fine. Okay.
I haven't called Andrew
I wasn't sure. That's so funny. Awesome.
Andy,
yeah. Love it. So we have a lot of questions here that we can go over today, starting with your experiences, your background, your accomplishments. But I think there was one thing that stood out to me more than others in the email you sent me. And listeners, you might find this very interesting too. Andy, why Star Trek over Star Wars?
That's a great question. And I realize this is getting close to religious fervor territory, and people have very strong opinions on this sort of thing one way or another. But to me, they're very different beasts. Star Trek to me is much more important, I think, and a much more interesting and better model to sort of look at. So the sort of utopian fiction that we can evolve past human greed and superstition and hatred is a very important lesson and an important goal to sort of aspire to, especially in the current, shall we say, political climate. It's important to have a vision that, we can get past all the sort of crap that humans carry around as baggage. When I was, when you're in grade school and high school and stuff, you take, your first history classes and you learn about World War II and slavery and Vietnam and whatever. You go through all these various bits of history, and certainly by mid-high school, I came to the conclusion that, okay, as a species, we've been through all this. We've done these things. We've decided that world wars are not a great look, and maybe we should try to avoid that in the future. And it seems currently that those lessons are kind of getting lost, and people are like, well, why not? Let's go invade a country. Let's go do this. Let's go do that. It's like, no, these are bad ideas, and we know these are bad ideas. So I think, sort of utopian fiction or any science fiction that examines our issues as in humanity, and that gives us kind of a guiding star to say, yes, we can get past that, if we choose to. So I think that's very important.
Right. So you're saying that one does this better than the other. You're arguing for the side of Star Wars, Star Trek, because Star Wars you're saying is more of just like a space opera, kind of more just like,
yeah,
not touching upon those more serious things. Okay.
It's seven samurais with light swords. That's fine. And
I was going to say, when I think of Star Wars, I think lightsabers, robots, space.
It's very enjoyable entertainment, but you don't really get those sort of life lessons and glimpse of our possible future out of that. But plus, it says right in the crawl, this happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So maybe a little less relevant.
I love that. No, that's really funny how, when you started to say that, I wasn't sure where the conversation was going to take, but I like that you said that, and now we have that to branch off into for the rest of this conversation. Sort of like, there's so much out there, lots of complex topics for us to cover, so it's important that our media is also reflecting that in a way, and I guess that sort of goes into, your work a little bit. Yeah, so in addition to that, to all of our listeners here who might not be able to see Andy right now, he's actually surrounded by music, instruments, keyboards, everything. So my next question to you is, you're a musician and a programmer, and that's an incredible combo. So tell me a little bit about that. How do they interplay? Do you use your music experiences when you're programming for any reason? In my mind, I know there's lots of ones and zeros programming, and music has notes. Does that interplay at all? Does it help at all knowing the patterns?
I can't say that they're similar activities, but I think that they certainly use similar areas of the brain and certain similar approaches. So a lot of people misunderstand software development and programming, I think. If you're not in the industry, it's very easy to get sort of the wrong idea about it. And the thing is, you might come across with the idea that programming is all about math or all about ones and zeros, that you have to be a mathematician. That's nonsense. I was rubbish at math. I barely got through calculus with my skin intact. That really wasn't my bag. Because the thing is, writing a good program is much more like constructing an essay for English class or writing a novel than it is a mathematical exercise. It's much more about structuring your thoughts and developing your thoughts and sharing your thoughts with others and learning their thoughts and kind of working in that sort of mental exchange of ideas is really what programming is all about. And so that's, to me, is a very direct correlation to what it's like to play in a band, or to write music for others to play, or to write music for others to listen to. You're in that same kind of mode of the interchange of ideas and structuring those ideas in a way that makes sense.
Right. Well, I think I can make the argument then that it's actually very similar to writing music. I mean, you're saying that it has to be very structured, very organized. That's kind of the same way as if you're reading, like, notes on a page, right? It's a structure you have to follow. It has predefined rules and constraints, but also a level of creativity to it. Like you said, you're thinking through different problems, trying to solve it. I mean, I'm not a musician myself, but I can only imagine perhaps it's the same if it's anything like writing, for example. You're planning it out, you're following guidelines and outline. I don't know.
It's the problem solving, right? So, the pacing of a novel, how much do you stretch the tension out? How do you sort of pace the tension and release and these sorts of things? That is 100% how you would structure anything from a jazz solo to a 2-minute commercial to a trailer to a pop song. Right. It's all about tension and release and pacing, and you run into problems. It's like, okay, well, I need to have a big climax here in the story or in the piece of music. How do I prepare that? How do I ramp up to that? What do I do afterwards? These are very similar sorts of problem solving activities that you hit in both realms.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I can see how that experience definitely sort of resonates into your writing too. You have to solve the problems, you have to find a way around it, whether it be in the form of coding or letters as well, in terms of words on the page, same kind of thing. So it all translates into that. A little bit. Maybe I'm stretching a bit, but
a bit, but I mean, it is, and there's definitely a high correlation there, because quite a few programmers, I might even say most programmers, have significant music backgrounds. They play in bands, or they played in high school and college, or they're super fans. There's a very high degree of correlation between those two professions.
Okay, yeah, no, I get that. Well, I mean, speaking of bands, you were telling me also you were in a Steely Dan cover band?
Yeah, for years, and I've played in a bunch of bar bands around, playing keyboards, trumpet and flugelhorn. Flugelhorn's fun because that's a little bit of an unusual instrument.
Yeah, tell me about that. What is it? That's a funny name. Flugelhorn.
Yeah, it looks like a big fat trumpet.
Okay,
so
let me look it up now.
A little bit larger, a little bit bigger bell. You can see one there in my office right behind me.
Oh, okay.
And Chuck Mangione made that famous in the 70s. He had that hit "Feels So Good" and then did the Olympics in, I think, 1980. I think he scored the Olympics. And you see it a lot in jazz bands and maybe a soft rock of a certain era. You don't see it a lot these days, but it's got a very mellow, not quite as sharp a sound as a trumpet does. So it blends in really nice, and it's kind of fun and something different.
Yeah, I mean, I just looked it up on my computer here, and it's funny because I've obviously seen these things before. When I look at it, I just never knew that was the name of it.
Sure.
It's kind of a silly name. I love it though, flugelhorn.
It sounds like something from Dr. Seuss, to be honest. But
yeah, actually it does. Yeah, funny enough, but
that kind of ring.
about it, All instruments should really have a name like that. Something like fun that almost perhaps sounds a little bit like the sound it might make, like a
Yeah,
flugel.
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, no, I mean, like, just kind of hitting the ground running from there. I mean, it's really clear you have a lot of different passions in lots of different areas, right? I mean, you're so into, Star Trek, Star Wars, that sort of thing, but also we got music, we have trumpets, we have programming. I mean, you're kind of all over the place here, but in a great way because you kind of made a name for yourself in each one of these areas. So, I mean, tell me a little bit about that. Is it hard to balance between programming and writing? Is that a lot on your plate at a time, or would you say that it's something you're able to balance pretty well?
It's hard to balance any number of passions. That's a problem right off because I don't think I mentioned it here, but I'm also an avid woodworker. So I've got a full woodworking shop, and I've made chairs and cabinets and all sorts of pieces like that. And yes, it's really hard because there's only 24 hours in a day. You got to sleep a fair number of them. You got to eat. You've got, responsibilities to your family, your kids, your parents, if they're still alive. You've got things you got to do out in life, a job, whatever you're doing, to make money, and trying to balance that out. That's always difficult. I mean, that's been difficult from day one and still is. But it's unfortunate in this day and age. It's really easy to lose time to social media and things like that you don't get. There's no ROI in that. It just sucks your time down, and you're not getting any real benefit from that. It's really, all of social media is really pretty much like people gossiping over a fence and saying, "Oh, did you see what this person did? And I heard this, and I heard there's aliens living in Antarctica," whatever, some kind of rubbish. And that's just a phenomenal time sink. And the interesting thing is that the people I know who are hyper effective at whatever they do, whether they're selling music to film and TV, or they're writing novels, or they're writing software, or they're starting their own company, or whatever ventures they're on, they don't watch TV. They don't spend time on social media. They don't, none of these things that just kind of suck your time down. They just don't engage in it because they don't have the time, right? They're too busy being awesome, to sort of get sucked into that kind of thing. And it's hard because all these platforms are designed to be addictive. So, I'm just going to check, Facebook for a moment. I'm just going to check whatever Threads or Instagram, one of these things. And they're designed to suck you in and keep you there. So it's really, you're fighting an uphill battle. You kind of have to go, sort of cold turkey on that, which is hard because you also have to use these vehicles for promotion for your book, your novel, your new business venture, your music, whatever you're doing. This is how you reach people too. So it's a real battle there to be able to use these things effectively and not get sort of sucked into it.
Yeah, wow. As you were talking, I just had so many different thoughts that came to my mind. I mean, first we have to rewind a little bit. Woodworking, that's so cool.
Yes. Well, that's a family thing. So my dad served in World War II, and when he came home from the war, was looking for something to do. My grandfather had been restoring antiques and building, replacing parts kind of as you needed to in the wood furniture of the time. So he started a furniture factory, all handmade. I've got a lovely dining room set where there's no screws or nails in the whole thing. It's all hand wedged and pegged and handmade kind of deal. So really nice stuff. So that's what I grew up with. In our family home, we had prototypes and all these interesting pieces that other people may not ever see. So I kind of grew up with that. And then, I remember very distinctly getting my first apartment out of college, and I forget what I needed a shelf or something for an apartment. It's like, oh, I have no tools. I have no way of doing this because I'm out on my own.
You're instantly gonna make it, and then you realize
yeah.
Oh, I can't.
And that's right. I didn't have anything.
So used to just whipping it up. That's funny.
Yeah. So that started my tool collection. I think I literally went out to Kmart and bought like a little cheap jigsaw or something. Something stupid because, first apartment, you don't have 2 dimes to rub together.
Right.
But that grew over the years. And, now I've got a very nicely appointed workshop that, however much time I spend in it, it's never enough time because I got everything else going on. But no, it's great. And yeah, my first inclination was, well, if I don't have it, I'll build it. And that's been true for software. That's true in music. That's always been my go-to, is like, well, even my novels, well, this doesn't exist. I got to go make it. That's
I love that. That's like my favorite phrase when somebody says, is like,
yeah.
I wrote my book because there's a need that had to be met.
It wasn't out there. And in fact, I'll delve on that a little bit. The first science fiction novel that I wrote is called Conglomerate. And the vibe with that is, we trash the earth. It's an ecological disaster. Everybody flees. Everyone's got their own ships, their house ships, and they all leave thinking they'll go settle other planets and whatnot, and quickly discover all these exoplanets and habitable planets we thought we discovered. For one reason or another, they all suck. They're not conducive to human life. It doesn't work out. So what happens is all the ships get together and they jam and they connect all their ships into this giant conglomerate. So that's where humanity lives. They're out in deep space with all their ships glued together, and it's utopian. They're happy. That's great. And then this straggler from the dead Earth shows up, and all hell breaks loose, and the plot takes off. But I really enjoyed writing it because that was a chance for me to invent what I thought a more advanced version of our society would look like. Past greed, past racism, past all these sorts of social ills that we have. There's commentary in there about, at that point in history, you can be any skin color you want. You just take a pill for it. If you want to be bright pink or bright purple or, albino white or shiny black or brown or, green, any color you want, you just take a pill, and no one gives it a second thought. It doesn't change your class of citizenship. It doesn't change how people look at you or interact with you. It's like a shirt you're wearing. It's not important. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff. It's like, this is what it could be like if we got past these things. And one of the best descriptions I'd read about science fiction in particular is, it's one thing to invent a technology, a transporter, warp drive, spaceships, whatever. The real challenge is, okay, now that you've got that, what is it like to live in that world? What does it feel like when this technology is ubiquitous, or you have this ability, or you don't have that ability, or whatever? And that's what really makes it fun. It's like, okay, so with these ships glued together and no planet behind us, and we've overcome many of our social ills, what does that look like? And what does it look like when a stranger shows up and you have to kind of explain to them that this is the way it is now, and it's not the way they think it is from, ages past?
Right. Okay, for the listener's sake, could you share the name of that book just one more time, so for anybody who wants to reference that?
Absolutely. It's Conglomerate. So it's CONGLOMMORA. And I've got a website at conglomerate.com. And that's just a word I made up from several kind of root words of gluing things together. And there's a sequel to it as well. And I've been meaning to write the third book in the series, but I've been busy. So
yeah.
We'll get to that.
I love that. And I'm glad that you were able to share the name of it again, because honestly, I'm very interested in that. I mean, I enjoy sci-fi a lot. And now that I know that title, I'm going to be able to pick it up and go check it out, because, I love the idea that even though multiple spaceships were meshed together, you were able to create a society where people were peaceful. It seems like, which is something like, yeah. My first instinct, what I was going to say to you was like, oh, they're definitely fighting. Like the person on this spaceship and this spaceship, they don't get along. And, these people have a rickety spaceship. These guys have a fancy spaceship. It's a problem. But you found a way to make everybody even, and hey, if anybody else can change their appearance just by taking a pill, like you said, that's something I wouldn't mind. It's kind of cool.
Right. And it reinforces the idea that it's just a cosmetic thing. It's silly to get fussed about it. There's a lot of talk, about immigration and nationalism. People from other countries, they're past all of that stuff, because they had the realization that nations are just lines, the invisible lines on the planet. They don't exist. It's just a construct. It's something we made up. And post their apocalypse, they're like, okay, well, none of that matters. It's just us.
Right.
It's, we the people, we're all there is. We're all that's left. We can't really afford the luxury of, oh, those people over there, their ship's fancier or their ship's rubbish or,
Yeah, it's all about just surviving. You probably need something from their ship anyway if you don't have it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So there's that sense of mutual dependency, and there's technology enough so basic needs are met, sort of like the Star Trek replicator kind of vibe. And that's really the thing. It's like once you have technology to provide for sort of basic needs, you can ditch a lot of that, a lot of the social ills that have dogged us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a ghostwriter and editor. I've been doing all this stuff for a couple years now, and I'm just thinking about how much time it probably took you to outline a book like that. Like,
oh, interesting. And we're going to get to this later. We might as well jump into it now.
Oh yeah, we can jump all around. So
for the fiction books, I have two distinct writing processes. One of them is you do like you say, you map out the high points of the plot, the overall arc, maybe the pacing a little bit, characters, important scenes, and then you just kind of outline that and then flesh it out as you go. The other way to do it is just have some characters in mind, have the environment in mind. Maybe you know how it's going to end, maybe not, and you just start writing. And that's how I did. So for Conglomerate, I did it that way. I went in and started chapter 1. Here's my characters, and we're wandering around and we're looking at the ship and we're introducing stuff, and things start happening and things happen over here, and oh God, there's a crisis. And it was really fun because I sort of discovered where the plot was going at the same time the characters did.
So, like, don't you need
a really interesting experience?
Planning though in advance. I mean, for me, if I'm writing and I'm doing I love that. Then
not for that one.
Maybe
it was like improv, right? It's like you're improving it, as you go. And I went back and edited. Some things didn't work out, and I would have to tweak it and stuff. But overall, it was very much writing from a position of exploration rather than kind of filling the details. And then for the second book in that series, I did it the other way. I plotted it all out ahead of time and filled it in. And, there's pluses and minuses to both. I think I enjoyed the first process more because it helps keep your motivation and your excitement up. It's like, all right, well, I've wedged them into this, pernicious problem here. How the hell am I going to get them out of it? I didn't plot this out ahead of time. It's
almost like you're reading the book as you're writing it yourself.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
You're watching it play out at the same time. Yeah.
Exactly. And you've got them in some impossible situation. They're stuck in their underwear outside the ship. Not really, but some crazy thing. It's like, all right, well, how am I going to get them out of this?
No way out.
And that's fun.
Frustrating though. Like, I'm glad you think it's fun, but like, have you ever been able to be like, okay, no, I actually have to like rewind a little bit. That doesn't make any sense. Or you're usually able to find a way out. I guess you think you can
almost always. I found a way out. When I went back to edit it, it was more of smoothing things over, or maybe something that showed up really suddenly. I'd have to go back and prepare it a little bit, do a little foreshadowing or introduce a character a little bit earlier, or mention something about them that turns out to be important later on. So there was a little bit of almost self-retconning there to go back and just kind of smooth the way to make it work out the way it ended up headed. There wasn't a ton of that. That was more kind of polishing than wholesale structural rework kind of vibe.
Yeah, it's always very interesting to hear about the different processes that writers and authors take, because it also depends on your purpose, right? Like your goal here is to, create a world, and once you have the world, I guess it's a matter of just making the characters, find a story within that world and finding a message within that story. But it's also like, I feel like a lot of times, for me at least, like I said, I'm always doing like chapter by chapter, point, this is what happened. I have like a separate document of like all of my characters and their flaws and their hobbies. And, it kind of just, one way is one way, the other way is another way. So I guess it just depends on however you like it. I'm guessing one of those like very organized people, whereas if you have just like that creative mind that can come up with it all, I love that too. And
you need both. You need both because it's important. Even then, I did keep tip sheets on my characters, so I'd keep them straight. And okay, this one's got that personality and is going to run into these sorts of troubles and that sort of thing. And then for the psychological thriller that I wrote, it's about a haunted house after the Second Civil War. So our hero is trying to escape the surveillance society that grew up after the war, and gets this big old abandoned house on the outskirts, way out somewhere, and then he's got bigger problems, because there's issues there. And that was kind of a hybrid. So I had the overall arc in mind. I had a couple key scenes in mind. Had almost a half an outline. Then all the dialogue, all the interesting characters that popped up, all kind of evolved as I'm writing it, sort of chapter by chapter.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's great how, depending on where you want to go with the story, your intentions for your audience, all of that, it just sometimes you have to find a method that works for you. And to all of our listeners out there, I mean, honestly, if you have a book in mind and you have that concept that you need to get on the page, do whatever works best. Like we can tell you.
Just right.
Exactly. There you go.
Because that's, I think a lot of folks, especially if you're just starting off, you haven't written a book before, or you're new to the process. And this is true for music too. It's easy to look at a finished product and think that you have to spit that out sort of on your first go, and it doesn't work like that. Stephen King doesn't work like that. Nobody works like that. It's not so much writing as rewriting. So some wise person, and it was probably Mark Twain, I don't know, look it up, but somebody said you want to write drunk and revise Hemingway. There we go.
My favorite, yeah.
One of those rascals, right? And
actually, there's people say he might not have said that. That's a whole other topic, but go ahead. I know what you mean. You just get the thoughts on the page. You write drunk, edit sober. Whoever did.
Throw it all down, because you can always delete later. You can always rework it. You can save stuff in a bin. Like, well, this was a cool idea, but it doesn't work for this book. Save it for the next one.
Yeah, definitely.
Save it for a short story.
Document of extra pages that I'm going to use one day. It's there. It's
for the director's cut.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, this kind of circles back to what you're saying about like having no time. You said you have so many interests. You want to do your woodworking, music, programming. Everything, programming, but it's a matter of fitting it into your schedule. And if you have a passion for it, you do fit it into your schedule. You don't just necessarily pick up the phone, go on social media like you mentioned before. You need to schedule it out, find a time that works for you. A lot of times I find myself telling somebody, just, you don't think you can write? What about when you're sitting in traffic and you can just use your phone to voice dictate, not text, voice dictate.
Right. Important.
Find time. Everybody has a minute here and there.
Absolutely critical that whatever you want to do, whatever venture you're embarking on, you have to touch it every day. It doesn't have to be hours a day. It could be 5-10 minutes, preferably more like a half hour at least, but some portion of the day where you just sit and knock out a paragraph, knock out a half a page, knock out 8 bars, do a quarter of your painting, do the sketch, whatever. But every single day, keep it, sort of refreshed in your mind, because what happens is you get distracted with, work, family, obligations, whatever, and a week goes by and you haven't touched it. And a week easily becomes 2, and that becomes a month. And then, damn, well, I never did get around to that. And right, Jerry Seinfeld talked about that a bit. And he said, while working on developing his comedy routines, he would make a point of sitting down like a half hour, hour a day, and he'd work on it. And then he would take one of those big paper calendars up on the wall, and when he focused and did his thing for the day, he put a big red X on the day on the calendar. The point being, never skip a day. So you've got this big visual aid that you've filled in the block on every day you've kept up, and if you for some reason you miss a day, that's a big bad thing. Make up for it. Don't let it happen. Don't let it happen again. It's that consistency is really, really critical, because you've got all this stuff floating around in your brain, and the longer you're away from it doing something else, it just goes down the drain. You forget those good ideas. And that's sort of a second point too, because of the nature of how our brains work. And I wrote a whole book on this, so I did a bunch of research, but the way our brains work, you will get your best creative ideas expressly when you're not sitting at the computer, when you're not sitting there typing. You're going to be in the shower, you're out mowing the yard, you're doing the dishes, whatever it might be, you're in the car, whatever. It's absolutely critical to have something with you all the time where you can just capture a couple ideas. Call yourself, leave a voicemail, do do a voice memo
I
on your
like that one.
phone.
That's the new one. The
Yeah,
voicemail.
whatever, something, right? Because the voicemail gag is great because a lot of these systems now will automatically transcribe it for you, so you can call yourself, leave a voicemail, you get an email with what you said, copy and paste, and you got something to work with. But it's critical to have something with you because we'll always say, some great idea comes to you, you're like, oh, I'll remember that. You will not.
No.
100%. You will not remember it. It's like when you first wake up in the morning, you're in that kind of hypnagogic state.
Try not to lose
Awake,
your dream,
half
right? You
asleep.
got to write it down.
Yeah, you got to write it down. It's like, oh, I'll remember. You're not going to remember it. You got to write it down. The palest ink is better than the best memory.
Definitely, for sure. I mean, you just got to find the time for it, whatever it is. Don't let it fade from your brain, especially if you're that inspired, like you have to get it down on paper or at least type a note in your phone. And that really just goes for any type of thing you're trying to get better at, whatever it is, writing or music or,
Absolutely.
I'm going to use this as an opportunity to kind of transition into programming here into sort of more of like the nonfiction realm that you're into. I think a good segue into that is you told me, I saw actually that you have a book about Minecraft, which is a whole nother realm too. But the funny thing is earlier in this conversation, you mentioned how you loved woodworking and when you were at your apartment, you wished you could just craft your tables and stuff. But so that kind of made me think, I was like, okay, I get why this guy likes Minecraft. You're always crafting and getting your piece.
I'm not a gamer. I mean,
No.
that really wasn't an option growing up because people didn't have computers. I did. Most people didn't, and they were pretty limited at the time as to what they could do. So I didn't really grow up with that habit. But when Minecraft came along, my kids were really interested in it, and kids in general were really into it. I thought, what a great vehicle to teach them the basics of computer programming in an environment that they're already. One of the system was set up so you could write plugins for Minecraft to do things that the game doesn't do by itself. You could add functionality to the game that they already knew. So one of the things I had taught them how to develop was a flaming cow shooter. So you have this thing that would shoot flaming cows out across the landscape, which is hilarious. I mean, unless you're, a dairy farmer, maybe that's a little touchy, but something. But the kids are like, oh my God, flaming cows. This is great. Mom, buy me the book, totally into it. And then because they want to build the flaming cow shooter, they go through the instructions in the book. And now, magically they're learning Java programming. They're learning how to do these things in a very, friendly, sort of non-threatening, non-academic, not theory heavy sort of environment. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. And that was the whole purpose of that book, was really just to help get kids interested in programming who might not have been interested otherwise.
It's so funny because I'm actually a teacher as well. In addition to my ghostwriting and editing, I do teach on the side. So I know what it's like to try to get a kid involved and interested in a game, or sorry, not in a game, in the lessons when they want to be playing the game. I think that's so clever that you were able to use Minecraft as a way for that because, yeah, obviously the kid's going to want to make that flying cow, right? I mean, it gets them more interested in it. And I mean, I've played Minecraft a couple times before. We've done the same similar mods, the ones that allow you to have the creepy guys stay off your back for a little while, that sort of thing. So I get how you're able to do that, and it's actually a lot easier than you would think. I mean, there's people have made whole worlds on Minecraft for different stuff. So I'm sure you just have so many different tips on that. So I mean, to all of our listeners out there, if you have any kids in your life, just get a copy of this, throw it in their hands, because honestly, I think that programming and tech, that's our future. So if our kids know that at an early age, they can apply these kinds of concepts to whatever thrown their way later on. That's only going to be beneficial to them.
Yeah, and it's funny, you don't think of how much society has changed even in the last 20 years. Even the last 10 years. But, my kids are in their late 20s, early 30s kind of time frame now. And if you ask them, their generation was a really interesting cross section because they started off with analog media. So when they were younger, it was VHS tapes, it was cassette tapes. They know to rewind a cassette tape, you stick a pencil in the end and twirl it. And,
oh yeah, I remember that.
right, all the kind of analog stuff. They grew up with that and then transitioned into CDs, and then later, iPods and iPads, and now the full, kind of phone digital experience. But my younger family members did not grow up with that. They grew up straight into the digital era. And the folks older than me are still pining after vinyl, or whatever. So but it's interesting because if you ask them what the most useful course they took in high school was, they'll say it was typing, because they learned to touch type in probably late elementary school. It was relatively early. And for high school and college, being able to bang out papers by touch typing, being able to program and code and knowing how to touch type was a huge, huge advantage for them over kids who didn't have, that kind of course. And you're sitting there, pecking away with two-finger typing on the thing. So it's kind of interesting. It's like that became, something that was maybe an interesting side thing. Oh, take a typing class, I need the extra credit, whatever, to that's actually really critical for, functioning, for creating in a digital world.
No, it's funny that you mentioned that class in particular, because I do remember that. I remember it was one of our electives, and they gave us like these plastic sleeves to cover the keyboard, and we had to type without seeing any of the keys. But the funny thing is now they don't need that kind of class anymore, because kids are already adapted to that. They already know how to use it. My kids know how to use my smartboard in the classroom better than they know how to hold their pencils.
Wow.
They automatically.
I believe it because, right, time marches on.
Definitely. It just goes to show how, the world's constantly adapting. So if you're going to be successful, you always have to be, refining your skills. And this just goes back to what you're saying before, finding the time to do these things that you want to do that you know is going to be important.
Yep.
If you didn't do that, you wouldn't have made, yourself an Amazon top seller. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I think that's a great segue. Tell me a little bit about that. We have to touch upon the Pragmatic Programmer a little bit in this conversation here. So
certainly,
how did you accidentally start a business from this book? Just accident.
Couple things happened. So first of all, a disclosure, I've been writing code commercially, getting paid for it by other people for over 40 years. 4 decades. And, obviously, talking about changes, it's a completely different planet from what it was 40 years ago in terms of how you write code, what code you write, how you go about it. It is completely different. And it'll be different again in another 5. I mean, that's just, the pace just keeps picking up. But, so this would have been around the turn of the century. God, that makes me sound ancient, doesn't it? Back at the turn of the century, I was totally kind of, so enmeshed in the field. I was out consulting, seeing a bunch of clients, doing all this stuff. I knew a ton of programming languages. That's something I find people maybe do less of today. They specialize in something like Java or JavaScript or Ruby or Python or Java, and that's like all they know. I've been kind of at expert level in at least a dozen different programming languages. I've used maybe 50. And, a lot of folks don't even know that many programming languages even exist. But they do. And they each have their pluses and minuses and, their benefits and whatnot. So here we are around the turn of the century. I'm out, consulting, really in the thick of it with different companies and everything. And my business partner at the time, who we wrote the book together, we came to the realization that every company we'd go to, they were doing the same stupid things over and over again. And we'd teach them out of it, and we'd get to the next company and they'd be doing the same stupid things, maybe even doing it worse, maybe putting their own little special twist on it, making it even harder. So we figured, okay, we keep running into this. Just to save us time on consulting gigs, we'll just write a white paper saying, hey, whatever else you do, at least don't be stupid. At least do these handful of things. And that project grew and grew until it became a book. And we wrote off to a couple publishers, and you could do that in those days, So we wrote to the head of the couple big publishing companies, and the one that we most respected that had published the books that we read our pitch and was like, yes, start now. We'll take it. We'll do it. And we were shocked because, right, even to, especially today, but even back then, that doesn't usually happen, right? You look at the, J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter. She went to what? 2 dozen publishers, 100 publishers. She went to everybody and no one wanted to touch it until she finally went to Scholastic. So, huge franchise, hugely popular, and she was rejected every step of the way. And that's normal. That's what usually happens. So the fact that
you guys said yes right away, right?
Yeah, said yes right away. And then we had to go write a damn book, which we had no idea how to do. So that was kind of, that's why I say it was sort of accidental, because we didn't start off with, oh, we're going to write a book, or even we're going to write a popular book. It was really kind of self-defense. It's like, all right, here's the things you need to do to not suck in a corporate setting. And that's why I think it turned out so good and why it's been so enduringly popular. I mean, unlike novels, tech books usually have the shelf life of sour cream. They don't last because next version comes out. I mean,
the very thing that you're talking about is obsolete.
Oh, absolutely. Think about how often you update the apps on your phone. I mean, it's a constant barrage, right? So it's constant change, right? None of that sticks around. So the fact that we were fortunate enough to even put out a 20th anniversary edition, I mean, that doesn't happen. That's very, very unusual. But the advice remains solid because despite all the technical change, people are still the same. We still suck in the ways that we sucked 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago. I mean, people are still people. So it has remained relevant and useful. And we were very successful, right? So here's our first book out of the gate. It was an Amazon top 10 bestseller right next to John Grisham. And there was two Harry Potters at the time. Which sucked. That bumped us down a peg. We could have been up one higher. Right. Hogging the top 10 spot there. Not very cool.
Yeah.
Which is, and again, for a hardcore tech book to sort of do that well is unusual. We weren't the only ones, but it's not common. There's not a lot of that. But we were totally plugged in, and they say write what you know, right? So this was what we knew. This was our expertise that we were able to get down in a very explainable, relevant way so people could read it and be like, oh yeah, I can do that. Because one of the big dangers that happens in fiction, but especially in nonfiction, is people tend to revert to a very stiff kind of ersatz formal writing that they thought they learned in high school or college, where it's very stilted, very stiff. It's usually a very passive voice, just awful, awful to read, but it sounds like an academic paper. And we didn't write like that at all. We wrote like this was a couple friends over lunch saying, hey, have you tried this thing? It works better if you do this. Try not poking yourself in the eye with the sharp stick. It hurts. Instead, do this other thing. Very collegiate, very friendly. And I think that really helped with its adoption because no one likes to read that other stuff that's just ponderous and thick and hard to get through. So, and that's kind of how we accidentally started the publishing company. We'd had that book and then thought, all right, it would be really cool if we put together like a kit, like a developer team in a box kit, and you ordered this box for your team and would have a couple books covering the fundamentals, some Nerf gun toys, maybe a rubber duck to talk to, things to hang around the office, kitschy kind of stuff. And so we started on that project and we had prototypes made, we had, boxes designed, all this stuff, and then realized to really do that, we needed more books than just the one we'd written. Or I guess too, at that point we'd written
confident then.
We needed more. Yeah, we needed content. So it's like, well, all right, we did 90% of the work getting our first book out the door. The publisher actually did not do the typesetting. They don't do the indexing. They don't do the copy editing. These are all outsourced to cottage industry, folks who do it. And it's like, well, hell, we could do that. So to get content, we started off like, okay, we'll have some friends. We'll write a couple books. We'll get a couple friends to write us a couple books. And that became the publishing company.
Wow. Well, that was quite the journey that you just took me on there, from just like, okay, we need to make some white papers to describe this one problem, filling a need, like you said, to, suddenly we have a publishing company.
Yeah.
One thing that stuck out, you said that, when they accepted your offer to publish it, you kind of looked and you were like, how do I do that almost? And I mean, I guess I'm just wondering, okay, you obviously, you made the words go from technical to relatable. You were able to somehow craft it into being a bestseller, but did you do that on your own? Did you have help? I mean, so how did you get
Yeah.
help?
So it's two of us. So it's, Dave Thomas was my co-author on that, and we'd been working together, and so we both knew pretty much the same level of this is what we want to talk about, and here's the things, because that's why we'd started working together, was we had very similar approaches to this is what you do that's right and this is wrong and here's how you get around that kind of thing. So, but even so, knowing what we wanted to write and having the contract in hand, we took off from our job. So we stopped consulting. We stopped taking on clients for over a year. It was probably somewhere between probably at least 18 months, maybe even closer to 2 years, where we just didn't take on anything else and worked on the book full time, 40 hours at least a week, 8-hour days, on the phone, hacking through stuff, and literally on some things getting down to argue about individual word choice. And like, well, this has that connotation and no one understands that word or that reference. We need something, a little broader, or that's too broad. People won't understand it. We need to narrow that in, whatever. So, but really, really putting it under a microscope to get the best product that we could to make it as understandable, as relatable, convey what we knew from our experiences and from industry best practices and other, research and papers and stuff, but making that accessible. And that was, two people for a year and a half working on that exclusively. And yes, and we trained up, we got books on grammar and, things that maybe we felt we were a little weak on, just to brush up. And all that helped. In fact, when it went to the copy editor, it was kind of funny. The copy editor said, wow, you guys did an absolutely great job. This was like the easiest one. I found very few problems. And then we get the markup back, and literally every page is a sea of red ink from crap that she had crossed out and fixed and changed. And she was delighted because it was so much better than what she usually got. And we were appalled because here we thought we had really studied up on this and done such a great job. And we had, but there was still, the other, the next 30% range that a professional copy editor is like, well, no, you can't really say it that way. That doesn't work out. You got to do this and, what have you. So that's another interesting point. It's like, as much as you train up and get expert in any field, there's people out there who know way more than you do and always will be.
Yeah, I mean, there's a side of that too, and there's also a side of like, you were writing just to make sure that the content was amazing, that the readers were going to be able to understand it. So, you don't necessarily need to know every part of it either. You're able to do what you can, you do your best, you do the research, you collaborate with your friend, like you said, but there's always a benefit in just like reaching out and, having that editor, like you said, give it another look, making sure it's perfect, like they're the expert in their field. They can help you make it even better. I mean, that's what we do on Authors on Mission. I do it all the time for my clients. They have a great piece, but you're close to the manuscript. You've been working in your brains in it every day. Like you said, for a half hour every day, you don't want to get too far away from it, but that's also a downside too. You can't see that, okay, this can be improved. This might be better.
Always need another set of eyes. That's true for music. That's true for tech books, not fiction books. You always need to run it by other people because you can get so much into your own little head. You think, oh, this is great. It makes perfect sense. And the first person reads it, it's like, this is a giant plot hole. They couldn't get to the train from there. What were you thinking? It's like, oh shit, and whatever. And you go back and have to deal with it. So having, feedback, any level of feedback is absolutely critical to get as often as you can, get friends to read it, listen to it, look at it, whatever. And what I found really interesting about the review process on every book is oftentimes someone will complain about something and what they say is rubbish. So what they say, you look at it like, well, that's wrong. That's not what that is. And that's not actually the problem. And you're right. But that doesn't mean there's not a problem there. It just means they didn't necessarily identify it correctly. So they get to a point, it's like, well, this is a gaping plot hole. And you're like, well, it's not actually a plot hole. Well, what it is this other problem. I didn't do this and I didn't do this other thing, and I need to set this up and I didn't explain that. And so they've identified something, and something is definitely wrong, and you definitely need to fix it. And it's probably not what they think the problem is.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I mean, for example, I've edited and written romance novels, right? And so sometimes, a writer might mention something like, oh, this person, but they're not yet introduced. So then the editor might be like, oh, this is a mistake in the name, right? But you meant to like mention them earlier on. Like that sort of thing. Like, you have to, it opened your eyes to whatever the book might need to make it better, like that, like, either way, I understand what you mean. Now, while we're talking about your books, and before we shift too far away from the Pragmatic Programmer, do you have a copy right now with you of the 20th edition by any chance that we can kind of show, or perhaps I could, I could always pull it up and have them attach it.
This is I'm in my music studio at the moment, and I don't have any workbooks out here. So
that's okay.
Actually, embarrassingly, I do not. But it's on Amazon. You can. It's easy.
Yeah. So you hear that, listeners? Just go ahead. We look it up. We're going to include links right along with this podcast. So check it out, and we'll be able to. I always like to ask just in case you have it near you. You never know. But with that, I mean, I think what I like to do before we start finishing off for this, podcast is I always like to have something I like to call a rapid fire round. It's kind of like a little game that I made up. Are you interested in playing it for a little bit?
Sure, why not?
It's just like, some fun games. It doesn't necessarily have to do with, anything particular. Just quick answer questions, let everyone get to know you a little bit. Just something fun to do. So the first question I have is, what snacks power you through your writing journeys? What kind of snacks do you need for like that inspiration to keep you going? For me, it's always chips.
Chips are always a popular one. I will admit, on the psychological thriller, there was a fair amount of scotch involved. That whole, right drunk, right sober, revised sober kind of vibe. It's funny. I don't like snacking while writing or recording or performing or whatever, but I will absolutely take a break and then go, chow down on chips or something. And it's kind of funny, right? Because you read the bag of potato chips and it says the serving size is, 12 chips or something. And it's like, okay, 12 chips is what I ate standing in front of the closet trying to decide whether I wanted chips or not. But
It's really funny. No, I get that completely. And, I guess when you think about it, having a snack it's a great way to like, keep your brain boosted and, thinking. But then again, you're also just like,
because you run out of glucose.
Mindlessly be grabbing for it. So
yeah, you seriously, you drain glucose when you're sitting there concentrating and doing very focused work. And yeah, taking breaks from whatever you're doing, any kind of intense concentration, creative effort, you've got to take breaks. Every half hour, every hour, something. Go walk around the office, the property, wherever you're at. Go take a walk, get some fresh air. And it is remarkable. And there's in the book I wrote on pragmatic thinking and learning, it actually goes into this in some detail. But when you're stuck on a problem, the worst place you can be is in front of the keyboard. So as soon as you get stuck on something, get up, walk to the bathroom, walk outside, walk across the street, do whatever. And what you tend to find is you're halfway into the walk and it's like, oh, I can just whatever. The answer will come to you. If you sit there banging away trying to force the idea to come, it will refuse. It will not show up. And you're just going to sit there and bang and get frustrated. So I find it very important to go get some air. On a regular basis, and especially when you get stuck on something.
Yeah, I understand that. And, it's funny, this actually was my second rapid fire question is, what do you do in order to, give yourself a break, get over any writer's block you might be having? For you, I'm guessing, is it to go ahead and, get some fresh air? Is there anything else that you might do?
The walk's critical because you got to be a little careful because, if you're working on a book or you're working on a tune, you don't necessarily want to go read something else or listen to music, because that kind of will get you off track of what's in your head and what you're kind of working at. So you want to distract yourself from the immediate problem, but you don't want to leave the stew unattended, kind of thing.
I like that metaphor. Yeah,
you don't want to crowd it out with something else. So you need to do something sort of mindless. Wash the dishes, go make some firewood in the shop, whatever. That's what we call failed projects in the woodwork shop. They become firewood. But
but I can only imagine you sitting away from your computer, grabbing the axe and just I can't
Yeah.
think of ideas. Let me chop up this wood.
Very therapeutic. Very therapeutic.
Yeah, I get that. People pay money these days to go do things like that. You have that in your backyard.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, let me ask you one more question before we round off. I always think it's good to have at least like three little fun questions like that at the end. Let me see here. Oh, who was the first person that you showed your manuscript to? The very first completed manuscript.
Wow. That's a
It
good
might be too
question.
hard to remember, but
Probably, I'm gonna guess my wife, because my kids would have been too young at the time, and my co-author and I lived in different parts of the country, so it's not like, we would have each printed it out and shown it to someone in our households. We wouldn't necessarily have shown it to each other because we were 500 miles apart. But yeah, probably spouse, I think, is the answer, because you're excited. It's just come off literally hot off the laser printer, and who else is in the house with you? It's like, hey, honey, look at this.
yeah. And she's probably watching you go about it day by day, so she might even already know a lot about it, or maybe she doesn't. I mean, do you keep her updated on your progress as you go about writing?
Yes. And it's funny. So my wife's in the medical profession, so very different angle. And you learn a lot just by osmosis, right? So I know way more about public health and healthcare, and even just, wound treatment and how to keep our kids from dying, when they're growing up, because, kids get into stuff. But, all the kind of medical stuff I've just learned, not from studying it or even particularly being interested in it, but just because it's in the air. You just kind of absorb it. And the same thing. So she knows a lot more about computers and software development, not a programmer, not really a computer IT type, but everything is these days, right? Healthcare is all IT now. So she absorbed an awful lot just from it. I didn't sit and lecture at the dinner table,
Right, okay.
but it's around. It's like, well, here I'm working on this thing, and this means that, and this makes sense too, and whatever. So it's definitely in the air. And interestingly, she wrote a book in her field, which became it's still in use, many years later, in nursing informatics, and she wrote a sort of classic textbook in that. So there's that.
Yeah, I mean, no, I love that you're able to do that, and you're almost like partners when you're not in many ways than one, because you're riffing off ideas from each other, supporting each other like that. That's great. I mean, I do the same thing to my boyfriend. Like I'm working on this project, that project. It's always a great way to go about it.
It is, and it's an interesting side tangent there, because you start off talking about, well, how do you balance all these different passions and work, and how do you maintain life-work balance? And that's always a really good question, because some would say, well, never bring your work home. You shouldn't discuss work over the dinner table or discuss it with your spouse or whatever. But on the other hand, if this is your passion, you can't leave that behind, because it's who you are. It's what you're doing. So, if you're working in a soul-sucking job that you don't like, for God's sakes, don't bring it home. Don't talk. Yeah,
you don't want to bring home the bad vibes, but if it's something you love doing, I mean, honestly, my boyfriend and I connect even more when we talk about our jobs, right? Like, it's something that we're both very proud of each other for, and we support each other, and he's very invested in a lot of the books that I'm writing and working on, and it's great that way. So, I mean, that's another just tip for our listeners too, like, don't be afraid to share what you're working on with others. It builds connection.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just as a side note to that I think is really important, especially in the age of AI, right? Because that's something we haven't touched on, but I think there's a lot of fear out there that AI is going to churn out books, it's going to churn out music, it's going to do all the fun stuff that we want to do, and leave us with the crap jobs. And there's a definite fear about that. But I don't think it's going to go that way, because the reason I always like to read a book, because it tells me a lot about the author. I'm a big fan of John Scalzi, right? Science, popular science fiction author.
I love that one. Yeah, that's Old Man's War, right?
Yeah, Old Man's War. Yep, and a bunch since then, a couple other series since then. But it's like visiting a friend, because he comes out with a new book. It's like, oh, what's John up to now? And you get to know him a little bit just through his writing and whatnot. So there's always that sort of personal connection to the musician, to the artist, to the writer, whatever. The downside of that is, because it's so easy to create content of any sort these days, you really need to stand out from the crowd. But that's not as hard as it sounds. And this sounds completely trite and cliched, but that whole idea of being yourself, really is what it's all about, because there is literally only one of you. In all the billions in the world, there's only one of you. So let your freak flag fly, let it hang out, be you, because that's something the AI is going to have trouble replacing, because it's not AI, it's generative LLMs. But anyway, it's autocomplete on steroids, right? Yeah. The current state of the art and the foreseeable state of the art is it's autocomplete. So there's only so much it can do drawn on what it has ingested. That's not really the space for creativity and invention. It's a space for regurgitating familiar favor. And there's a market. Regurgitating. Yeah, but it's a regurgitator. So, if you want to lead the charge, go for it. No one else can do it. That's on you. Make it happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much, I guess, the overarching message of today's podcast is, no matter how busy you are, no matter what you're going on, if you have a passion for it, you're interested in it, you have an idea that has to get out there, find the time. Don't let, any fears like, AI being like the killer of the industry, or like anything else you might have talked about. Get out there, write your book, because it's still a thriving, industry. You built a whole company on it by accident, just by getting your book out there. So
exactly.
That's just one aspect of it. And yeah, before we wrap up, aside from the 20th anniversary, do you have any other exciting projects on the horizon right now?
There's a lot on the horizon in various states of inception. I've been focusing on a couple of music projects, and I've got a really fascinating music project that I'm collaborating with someone on next year that I can't tell you about at the moment, but it's unusual. It's unusual. It's one of those things. It's like, would that even work? Why would you? Oh, they did that. Oh, isn't that cool?
That is so mysterious. And I'm like, what can't you tell me about? That's a music project. I'm like, are you forming a band?
Very much the whole let your freak flag fly kind of vibe. Okay. It's like, combining things that probably should never be combined, but it's like, wow, that could be cool. So we'll see how that goes.
Oh my goodness. Well, please shoot me an email whenever this pops up. I'll follow you too on socials and keep an eye out. Speaking of which, can you let our listeners know what those are too? So I can also kind of be like, all right, we got to figure out what this mystery project is. And where can we find you outside of this?
I'm regularly on Mastodon. I'm no longer on Twitter. I actually deleted my account on Twitter, but you can find me on Mastodon. We'll put the handle in the show notes. It's Pragmatic Andy. We'll put the handle in the show notes. And yeah, you can find me. My homepage on the web is toolshed.com. And that's got a lot of my writings and links off to my other endeavors, the books and the music and whatnot. So that's probably the simplest thing to remember is you can find me at Toolshed and then go down the rabbit hole from there.
Okay. Well, you heard it there, listeners. Check it out. He's got everything out there, whether you're interested in, nonfiction, self-help, sci-fi. Andy's got it all. So check it out. That's all for now. All for this episode of Authors on a Mission. Andy has gone from programming to publishing, so it just goes to show how your experiences too can be transformed into guidance for others. Whether you're a programmer yourself, an experienced developer, or just a great fan of stories, sci-fi, anything, you're in for a treat from what you heard from this video. Check out his website. And if you're inspired to share your own wisdom through your book, visit authorsonmission.com to discover how we're helping great leaders like you write books that create legacy every day. So with that, again, Andy, thank you so much. And to our listeners, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good one.